Okay, we're going to make a chocolate Oreo cheesecake. This is a really easy cake to make, and yet everybody loves it. If you take it to the office once, then you're stuck taking it year after year after year because everyone always asks you to bring it for birthdays or potlucks or whatever. And I think this cake has probably actually saved my job once because my boss loved it, and he even loved it after a really possibly ill-considered but hilarious April Fool's Day prank I played on him. So this cake is not only delicious, but may end up saving your job at some point. Who knows? So the ingredients are really simple. You need a few tablespoons of softened butter. You need 3 8-ounce packages of softened cream cheese. You need 2 4-ounce packages of semi-sweet baking chocolate. Any brand will do. You need the infamous Oreos. You will need 3 eggs, 1 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and a few walnuts chopped up. These are optional, but they really make it look good at the end. You'll need a springform pan and some parchment paper. The wine's for me. It's not an ingredient in the Oreo, but it does go really well with the chocolate Oreo cheesecake. So those are all the ingredients that you'll need. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is take our springform pan and line it with parchment paper. This is a standard size pan, and I think you could probably buy parchment paper in already pre-cut in little round things, but it would probably be really expensive, and it's just easier to do it yourself. So just take the bottom out of your springform pan, draw a little circle on the parchment paper, and cut it out. And that is what you're going to put on the bottom of your pan to keep the crust on the cheesecake from sticking to the pan. So here's the wonderful circle of parchment paper that we've cut out, and you're just going to go ahead and put it in the bottom of your pan. It doesn't matter if it's a little bigger. It's actually kind of better if it's a little bigger because it's going to help you get it out at the end. But that's all you need to do in terms of pan preparation. So now the first step is we're going to make the crust of the chocolate Oreo cheesecake. The recipe calls for 18 Oreos crunched up. I always do like 22 or so. So just kind of break them up in chunks. You probably know your food processor better to know what size chunks to put in. This is Cuisinart, but it's an old one with kind of not a super sharp blade, so it takes me a while to go ahead and run this and get everything down to just kind of delicious crumbs. I've also tried to do this before, taking the delicious filling out of the Oreos before I crunched them up for the crust. The upside of that is you get to eat the delicious filling, but the crust is not as good. So leave the filling in when you're putting them into the Cuisinart or whatever your brand is to crunch them up. So I've got all my Oreos in here in my food processor, and actually a really good tip is go ahead and just do the whole box or the whole package of Oreos at the same time, because then you will have additional Oreos left to sprinkle on the top, which looks really nice, and you can save yourself some time for the next time you make this chocolate cheesecake. The other thing is, if I do crunch up some extra Oreos, I put them, double baggy them, put them in plastic bags and stick them in the refrigerator. There are so many preservatives in these Oreos. Once you crunch them up and stick them in a baggie in the refrigerator, they last pretty much forever. now I've got all of my Oreo cookies crumpled up. There's still some extra in here, which I'm going to save, but it needs about 1.5 cups. So anything above and beyond 1.5 cups, you can use for decoration or for the next chocolate Oreo cheesecake you make. Now you're going to take your butter. The actual recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of melted butter, but I always use about 3 because I think it makes a better crust and because some of it gets left in the pan when you melt it anyway. So now all I'm going to do is go ahead and mix the butter in with the crumbs, and this is the fabulously difficult crust. This is all, those are the only 2 ingredients that go into it, are the crunched up Oreos and the butter. And I just work it till it kind of sticks together a little bit. Oh, that looks good. So while I've been crunching up the cookie crumbs, I've been preheating the oven to 325 degrees. So now I'm going to go ahead and take our crust ingredients and just put them in here and kind of pat them down. You can tell by feel which areas need to be smushed down and which don't. Basically all you're doing is taking your available crust material and flattening it down into the size of the pan. And once you've got that where you want it, the recipe says that it goes in the 325 degree oven for 10 minutes. I usually only put it in for about 5 or so because I think it makes it, if it's not quite as crisp, I think it makes it easier to cut, especially if you're cutting it into like a lot of pieces. So I put it in at 325 for about 5 minutes. The official recipe is for about 10 minutes. Okay, so our crust has baked for 5 to 10 minutes, depending upon whether you go the Cynthia method, which is 5 minutes, or the official recipe, which is 10 minutes. So now we're going to take our 2 4-ounce boxes of semi-sweet chocolate and break them up. I always wonder why they put these little squares on there, because you can never break them into the smallest square anyway. The goal is going to be to melt these so that we can then mix them in with all the rest of the ingredients. And when you're melting chocolate that's got sugar in it, stand over it and stir it because it's really easy to burn. So you'll be able to tell if it's burning because it's going to really start to stink. So now we're going to melt this very carefully while stirring it over the stove, medium heat. Okay, so now we've melted our semi-sweet chocolate, baking chocolate, and we're going to put it in here in the mixing bowl along with the 3 14-ounce packages of cream cheese. Make sure you get all the chocolatey goodness. And we're going to go ahead and put a cup of sugar in and about a teaspoonful of vanilla. I never measure the vanilla, I just dump it till it looks about right. And we're going to use my fancy 1990s Hamilton Beach mixer and mix it all up. The only other ingredient that we're going to put in here are the eggs, but I don't want to put them in quite yet because the hot chocolate might make them solidify a little bit. So let's mix this up first. Okay, now I've got the cream cheese, the melted chocolate, the sugar, and the teaspoonful of vanilla mixed up together. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in 3 eggs. And mix those together. Okay, so now it's all mixed up without any lumps or bumps in it. If you still have a few lumps or bumps, that's okay. Some of them will cook out, and we have an ingenious way of hiding the rest of them as the finishing touch on the cake. So now we're going to go ahead and dump all of this into our pre-baked crust. Okay, so we're going to take all of our mixture and glorp it into the pan with the crust. It's going to be messy no matter what. And sort of smooth it out. Get a couple good shakes to even it up. And this is going to go in the oven at 325. It's better if you let it sit for about 5 minutes, shake it a little bit, and even it up. That if there's any air bubbles in there, that gets the air bubbles out. I've actually forgotten, 45 to 55 minutes. So my oven tends to heat hot, so I'm going to check it after about 45 minutes. The size of your springform pan is going to affect the cooking time. So what you're looking for is when it is done, whether it's 40 minutes or 45 or 55 minutes, is that it's kind of solid in the center. We're going to cool it before we finish it off anyway. And you know your oven better than I do. So I'm going to start checking mine at about 40 minutes. And we'll see how long it actually takes. One last tip. If your springform pan is old and leaky, put a cookie sheet underneath the pan, or else it's going to be really, really difficult to clean your oven when this is done. Okay, so I've just taken the cake out of the oven, and you'll notice it's got some cracks here, and it's a little sunky right here in the middle, but this is all okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is just let this cool for a little while. And then comes the waiting part. Once it's cool, we're going to put it in the refrigerator overnight. For my springform pan, I leave the rim of the pan on while I refrigerate it overnight. Some people have a pan that clings if it is refrigerated. So depending on your pan, you may want to cool it and then remove the ring before you put it in the refrigerator overnight. So we're going to sit this overnight, and then you'll see how we disguise all the imperfections so that it not only looks great, but tastes great. Et voila! Like magic! It's the next morning, and your cheesecake has been sitting in the refrigerator all night. So we're going to go ahead and uncover it and take it out of the springform pan. And this is the tricky part. Remember we put the parchment paper in on the bottom? Well, you can actually put it on the plate with the parchment paper. I've done that before. And depending on what your plate's like, it's sometimes easier to cut the individual pieces. But I'm going to attempt to do it the correct way and peel the parchment paper off before we put it on the serving plate. It's a little messy, but you can eat the crumbs. Okay. There we go. So now, I warned you about the mess. So now, here we go. It doesn't look exactly perfect, and you can see there's it kind of sunk in a little bit as it cooled off. So it's a little uneven. That's not even going to show, because to finish it off, we're going to use the rest of the crumbled up Oreo cookies and just sort of scatter them around. And in with the mixed Oreo cookies, we're gonna put some chopped walnuts. I've used chopped pecans before. You can use hazelnuts. You can use pretty much anything. I think the original recipe actually calls for chopping up some strawberries and putting on the top, which would also be good. So let's put a few walnuts in. As many as you like. I'm just going to put however many I happen to have chopped up. Another little scattering of chocolate. And there you have it. It's a delicious chocolate cheesecake. Everybody will love it, and it's not really that hard to make.